Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, this is going to be an update to the One Punch Paladin Judgment build. Uh, Now we're one too many punches, as I've gone for a more spam-oriented approach. As it turns out, you can get away with that now with all of the plus levels you can afford on the tree and all of the scaling that we have access to. Also, as well, the stun locking is rather fun. So all of that combined leads to One Punch Paladin getting a little bit of an upgrade. Now, you could still go with the Super Giga Punch version, like, we did in the past, but I prefer this version as it has much better clear than the other. Now, I will state and note, this is a meme build. You should not play this. It is for fun. If you want a serious build with actual damage and actual investment, I would heavily suggest checking out normal Judgement, but that's not what you guys come here for. You guys come here for the fucking memes, and that's what this is today. The concept is we are building around Hands of Judgement. Hands of Judgement allows us to stack a lot of attunement to get a lot of damage. Not only does it give us healing effectiveness, which gives us more pen and more damage, it also gives us as well flat damage and then also as well mana. So technically we do more damage based on our max mana because, the mana that we're consuming, yada, yada, yada. It's fun, but we aren't investing too hard into the mana consume node, mainly just because we're trying to go for, like I said, the spam approach. We're trying to not consume our entire mana bar. We're trying to hit him a bunch of times. So we definitely only put one node into the mana consume node, and it works fine because of that. Now, some of the things that have upgraded this build significantly, the first thing I will say is the boots. The new boots that's supposed to support Flay that have melee attack speed, movement speed, and more damage against high health enemies. That is amazing for this build. It pretty much allows you to nuke or annihilate anything that isn't a boss immediately, as 50% more damage on top of all of the damage you're already doing with, the big punch allows you to clear monoliths with ease now because the area is big and you hit really hard now. That makes it so that, pesky champions don't get in your way, right? Now, this is also, good as it stacks with the more damage against high health enemies on top of Judgment that has that. And that allows you to blitz through the boss's HP till he gets to like low life, which is around, I think like 60% HP or something like that. Or, he's no longer high health anyways. That one's fun. Also, melee attack speed is really hard to get without utilizing a weapon on this kind of setup, because normally you'd like put on a sword and then you'd get 30% attack speed at the top of Sentinel and all this and all that. Attack speed's really hard to come by, so having the 20% attack speed on the boots is rather nice, right? That's actually why we go for T7 attack speed on our gloves instead of like T7 attunement, because attack speed is one of our biggest multipliers of damage. Other things that have upgraded the build significantly: Wings of Discord. So something interesting, I was testing around Blue Feather Band, and Blue Feather Band actually does reduce Judgment's mana cost. And that's actually interesting. It allows you to spam more Judgments. Now, of course, you get more damage from the consume node when you have Urgent Inquisition, but that's not that big of a deal, right? When we're trying to spam. The only problem is I believe that it's currently bugged, or at least Judgment is bugged. So if you grab the node that turns off Consecrated Ground, Judgment no longer has a spell portion to its ability, meaning that in theory it should lose its spell effect, like the spell tag. And we've had skills like this before, like, Shield Rush, where if you spec into the node that makes it so it's no longer a traversal, it loses the traversal tag. That was a big nerf back in the day, and that was on purpose, right? And we have precedent for that, meaning that in theory that it should be losing the spell tag, but it isn't. So you can technically throw on a Blue Feather Band and just, start spamming away with Judgment, which is rather funny, but we did find something better, and that's Wings of Discord abuse. Turns out Wings of Discord is pretty good for Judgment. That's because of the existence of idols like this, where you can run a very large amount of crit multi. One of the bigger problems with this kind of setup is we don't really have that much room for crit multi outside of the amulet and stuff like that, because we just don't have that much room. And we're also not using the melee crit multi boots as well. meaning that, like we just don't have that much room for a melee crit multi. And this is one of the best ways of getting a large amount of it. This is like 80%. Also, as well, if you end up getting it with, percentage armor on the suffix, like you should, you end up with a bunch of percent armor as well. Wings of Discord also helps us cap out our crit. So instead of having to put all 4 points into the more critical strike chance against ignited enemies, utilizing Wings of Discord on top of all the other base crit that we get now at the top of Paladin, and of course running Peak of the Mountain, this means we only need 2 nodes into this. And that's important because we want as many points in Judgment's tree as possible, as there's just oodles and boodles of damage that we can invest into. So anything that can solve some, plus level issues is great. So that, base crit's really good. Then we can have idols like this, where we double the healing effectiveness and the fire pen, and then we can get even more fire pen. Then we can run idols like this, which give like a bunch of melee flat and as well percentage melee damage and, resistances, HP, like the whole 9 yards. And then on top of that, we can also run a Thread of Ambition. Since we're playing a spammy Judgment build, instead of trying to play like the One Punch Man version, we can actually afford to run a Thread of Ambition, which will of course kind of, the way it works, at least personally from what I've seen so far, is it kind of what would you call it? It kind of like smoothed out your damage profile a lot, mainly because once the enemy is no longer on high life, our boots and the node and Judgment don't work as well. But Throne of Ambition, when you're stacking it up, kind of makes up for that fact. So you kind of end up, getting back a lot of damage that you lost because of that. So it smooths out your damage profile for the entire fight instead of having you hit like a wet noodle at the end. Now, to give you an idea on the dummy right now, I'm hitting well over 25 million when everything's up. The enemy is like high health and all that. So I'm like punching the dummy multiple times, 25 million crit each time. And then, when I don't have my setup going with like the more high health enemies, it's more like 15 million, which is still respectable, but it's not like the most DPS. Unfortunately, last Epoch is entering a phase in its existence where saying that I'm hitting 15 million every single time with a melee ability just isn't enough these days. Especially for Uber, right? Which is why I categorize this as a meme build. Mainly because like the damage in theory should be good enough, but I don't know if you noticed, but my defenses are a little bit subpar. And that's just because, guess what? I'm playing Circle of Fortune and I'm trying to play a meme build. Turns out when you're playing Circle of Fortune, you don't have the access to the most gear on the planet, which means I have to work with what I got, especially if I'm working on such a short time frame like I am, as I'm busy doing other stuff in life and I'm not just making videos all day, right? So this means, I'm not as tanky. And to get myself tankier, I would have to sacrifice damage. And when I sacrifice damage, then that means the fight would last longer and, it gets exponentially longer. Unfortunately, due to the way that Uber Aberoth works, the less damage you deal, the longer the fight gets exponentially due to the frailty and stuff like that, especially if you don't have any cleanse in the tree and stuff like that. And we're actually turning off our cleanse source from our Judgment as well, because we're turning off consecrated ground. So like a lot of bad stuff. But it does everything else in the game, so I guess that's good enough these days. I don't know. Just, something weird, Actually, I did a comment the other day talking about how like, how I have like absurdly high standards for builds nowadays, when I'm like, oh, like it's doing like 99% of the content, but it can't do Uber, so I'm sad about it. I'm just like, well, I don't really put these expectations on the viewer. Like, if the viewer wants to like play a build to like, I don't know, 300 corruption and farm that all day, like more power to them. Like, I don't really care what you guys do, but I have my own personal goals and my own personal things, of what I want to do. And I like making good quality content for you guys. So I try to push my content to the limit, and that includes the damage numbers. So we try doing as much damage as we can on this channel on the builds, and we try to make them as tanky as possible, also doing as much damage. And this is just one of those cases where, yeah, we could get tankier if we invested more currency into the character, but the fact that I'm playing Circle of Fortune is actually to my benefit currently this season, as it definitely makes the builds a lot more approachable. One problem I always had with Merchant's Guild was after a while, it kind of just got flat out ridiculous with the gear. Like, good example, last season, I geared up a Flame Whip character to do a bunch of like Aberoth kills and Uber Aberoth kills, and I had such ridiculous gear that I didn't even end up making a video for the character because I was just like disgusted at how ridiculous the gear was. Like I had a double tier 7 like Nihilus. I had like a 4 LP like Chthonic Fissure Sword. I had everything I could possibly want for that build, and I just kind of sat there and I realized, uh, I shouldn't make a video on this, so I didn't make a video on it. But yeah, Circle of Fortune is actually working in my favor here. But yeah, let's talk about the build more in detail, shall we? So the first part of the plan is to stack as much attunement as possible. Right now, I am only at a measly 100 attunement. If you were to refine this build further, you could easily hit 150 plus attunement if you just simply made better gear. Now, of course, this requires us to not have a, melee weapon, so we are going to lack in terms of attack speed, so we do need attack speed and other sources. That's why we're going for a tier 7 melee attack speed instead of tier 7 attunement. Now, of course, eventually you'd want a pair of Hands of Judgment with HP, but I literally spent, I think, 500,000 favor working towards trying to get a 3 LP Hands of Judgment, and that was the only pair that I got with good rolls. And then I went and tried to re-roll the other ones using, all the failed ones, and those ended up not doing anything. So I spent literally, I think, a day of farming, not just from that favor, by the way. I did some imprinting, stuff like that. Like I farmed for a lot, and this is what I came up with. Unfortunately, I missed the double tier 7. That's just going to be a common theme nowadays, it seems, in COF. I had a T7 hybrid on the other suffix and I missed it, so whatever. But at least we hit the attunement. Then for the Siphon of Anguish, same thing. I had T7 life and T7 attunement, missed that as well, and missed it on the other ring as well because I creationed it. All of a sudden now I have T7 attunement at least on it, right, for damage. Cool. But yeah, you want as much attunement as possible because it's multiplicative with everything, because it gives you percent damage, it gives you healing effectiveness, which then becomes penetration and more damage, and then it also gives you, of course, more mana, which then makes it so you get more damage overall, and then it also, of course, gives you the flat damage in the area, which is all very good. Now, we're doing a lot of Wings of Discord abuse. I actually slammed a tier 7 Vengeance mana roll on it so that I could actually sustain my Vengeance spamming. And then, of course, I actually only got a 3% crit roll, but that was enough for what I currently had. We had a lot of healing effectiveness, a lot of Fire Pen with melee attacks, a lot of crit multi, a lot of percent damage, a lot of armor. Unfortunately for the large Rye idol, as you can see there, we can only get fire penetration on the suffix, and the prefixes actually don't really give us that good of affixes. So in theory, it might be better to actually run a 1x2 that has like percent life and like something on the suffix instead. I'm going to assume that's better, but a really cool star of the build is actually the Humble Weaver idol I ended up dropping, giving us well over 34 flat life on top of 40% increased melee damage and 12 melee flat on such a small compact package. Very neat. But yeah, and then of course you can fill out the rest of your idols with whatever, and then also run a Throne of Ambition. Now we want to be stacking as much healing effectiveness as possible. Not only does it give us a lot of ward thanks to Synthesis of Light, it also gives us fire penetration with Righteous Firebrand, and then it also gives us more damage with Judgment, and then also gives us sustain as we're running a Peak of the Mountain, meaning that we have no melee leech, but it does help us cap our crit much quicker so that we can invest more into damage. I am using a lot of uniques in this build, so let's go over them. Bulwark of the Last Abyss. It's a very good shield. Not only is it just a good shield in general, it also kind of acts as using like a dual wield weapon, mainly because not only can we put healing effectiveness on it, which is damage for us, it also gives us 70% melee critical strike multiplier. The downside is not that big of a deal, but the crit multi it gives us is integral, as it brings us from like probably I think like 400% crit multi to 470, which is, another 25% more damage. Very large amount of damage boost. Army of Skin is really good. Get a better one than I did. I missed the double tier 7 again. I mean, it was a tier 6 and a tier 7, but I didn't put the tier 7 guaranteed on it. I put the tier 6 guaranteed, the tier 6 attunement. That's because I wanted attunement and I was hoping I'd hit the other one, but we didn't, you know, it sucks, it's just how it is. And then, of course, get a better roll on the melee attack speed. I only got 17%, but you can get like up to 26% on attack speed. Peak of the Mountain as well. I missed another, I think it was like a T7 and then a T6% increased life. Yeah. But the crit is really good. It helps us cap out our crit. The level of vengeance is just for percent damage. That's actually one problem that we have. Even with all this attunement scaling, we do actually miss a little percent damage. So you definitely want attunement. You definitely want like levels to scale there for that percent melee damage. Then as well, we have, you know, the Shattered Chain Siphon of Anguish attacks for melee builds. Nothing you can really do about that. Lots of extra damage. Nothing you can really do to get away from that. All right, and that's going to be it for the video today. With all that being said, this has been Dread. I have to go do something else. Thank you for watching the video. Bye. Make sure to leave a like in the comment. Whatever. Bye.